The courtroom was almost empty now. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long golden stripes across the polished oak benches. The smell of old wood and lemon polish lingered in the air, the kind of smell that had witnessed tears, verdicts, and vows. He sat alone near the back, his hands folded neatly in his lap. Dressed in a navy blue suit a size too big, the young man looked more like a boy waiting for permission to speak than someone at the center of a storm. Outside, reporters waited, cameras ready, questions sharp. Inside, there was only silence, and the echo of her name on the docket still printed in bold at the top of every document. They had called her a titan in her time, a force, a legend in a tailored blazer. And now in death, she had become a scandal. The estate she built, every brick of it, was in dispute. Not because she left nothing behind, but because of whom she left it to. No one could understand why she did it, but he knew. And in that quiet moment, with the sun warming the side of his face, he thought not of the lawsuit, but of the garden bench where it all began. If you've ever believed in dignity, loyalty, or love that stands the test of time, this story is for you. You're about to witness a quiet bond between two people who were never supposed to meet, much less matter to each other. But life, and perhaps fate, had other plans. There will be whispers, there will be letters, and there will be a single moment that changed everything. Not in a flash, but like morning light slowly filling a room. And as you listen, pay close attention. There's a small moment near the end that might surprise you. Just for fun, we'll ask, how many times did you hear the name Hannah Cooper? Get it right within 7 days, and we may feature your name in a shout-out as a thank you for being part of our Fiction Echoes family. Watching this later? Comment anyway. We read every word. If stories like this speak to your heart, we'd be honored to have you with us. Drop a comment. Tell us what touched you most. And if you haven't yet, feel free to like, subscribe, and tap the bell, so you'll never miss a story that reminds us what really matters. The first time she noticed him, he was setting down a tray of lemon water by her poolside. Quiet, polite, and quick to vanish before anyone thought to say thank you. She didn't know his name then. Didn't need to. He was just another hotel waiter, hired for the summer, serving drinks and wiping down tables at the exclusive cliffside resort where she kept a quiet suite each July. But something about him was different. Maybe it was the way he stood just out of the sun, never squinting like the others. Maybe it was how he folded the napkin before placing it, as if someone, somewhere, had taught him to respect small things. Hannah Cooper didn't ask for much these days. At 70, she was long retired from boardrooms and battles. Her name still hung in bronze on the lobby of Whitmore Holdings, but she hadn't set foot in the building since her husband's funeral 8 years ago. The world had become loud, fast, forgetful. She preferred silence now. And the boy, no, the young man, brought it with him. He didn't talk, he listened. One day, when a nearby couple raised their voices and stormed off, the woman flinging her drink, the man chasing her down the garden path, he simply looked at Hannah and gave the smallest shake of his head. No smirk, no gossip, just understanding. She laughed, just once, and that laugh startled them both. The next day, he left a folded paperback on the table beside her lounge chair. Hemingway, well worn. She raised an eyebrow. He only said, "You mentioned you liked stories with quiet endings." She hadn't remembered saying that, but apparently he had. There was a bench on the far end of the resort grounds, half hidden behind a curtain of ivy and weathered stone. Most guests never found it, but Hannah Cooper had. It overlooked the cliffs, where the Pacific stretched out like a great gray canvas, always shifting, never still. From that spot, she could hear the gulls, feel the breeze, and remember who she used to be before the world demanded so much from her. He found her there one morning, not by accident. He didn't say a word at first, just stood with 2 cups of black coffee, waiting for her to speak. She motioned to the bench beside her. It became their quiet rhythm after that. Some mornings, they sat in silence for nearly an hour. Other days, she spoke about things she hadn't said out loud in years, about the price of ambition, the loneliness of boardrooms, and the son who only called when he needed something notarized. He never interrupted, never tried to fix it. And in that silence, something rare began to grow. Not romance, not quite friendship, but a kind of sacred trust. She learned his name slowly. He shared little but enough, that he'd taken the job after dropping out of college, that he sent most of his paychecks home to his mother, and that he read because it helped him feel like the world was still big, even when his room was small. Hannah had met world leaders who didn't listen half as well, By the end of the second week, she was leaving handwritten notes for him behind the front desk. Simple lines of poetry, dog-eared articles, pieces of her thoughts. By the third, he was responding. A folded napkin with a pencil sketch of the cliffs, a quote from Rilke scribbled on a coffee sleeve, a crossword with only the down clues filled in, daring her to solve the rest. He never overstepped, never asked for more than she offered. But in the way he tilted his head when she spoke, in the reverence with which he handled the smallest of gestures, Hannah saw something she hadn't felt in decades. Not pity, not flattery, respect. And on a Tuesday morning in late July, she turned to him on that garden bench and asked a question that surprised them both. What would you do if someone believed in you again? He didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the sea and said, I'd try not to waste it. She nodded, and that was the moment, though neither of them knew it yet, when the rest of the story began. Summer faded. She left the resort in early August, as she always did, but this time something was different. She didn't just pack her things. She left behind a note at the front desk, sealed in a cream envelope with thick paper and a gentle scent of lavender. His name was written on the front in looping cursive. Inside there was no confession, no praise, just 4 lines in her firm, deliberate handwriting. There are people who take and people who tend. You are the second. This world will not always reward that, but I will. E.W. She signed it the way she used to sign merger contracts and shareholder directives, with quiet certainty. He didn't know what to do with the letter. He tucked it into a book and told no one. 3 months passed. The garden bench sat empty as the leaves changed. The resort shuddered for winter. And then she died. Peacefully, in her home, surrounded by nurses and nightlight shadows. No final speech, no warning, just a quiet exit, the way she'd always lived since retirement, on her terms. The news didn't make headlines, but it did stir ripples in the corridors of wealth. Hannah Cooper was more than a CEO. She was a matriarch, a benefactor, a symbol of a certain kind of American power. The kind that didn't shout, but built legacies brick by brick. Her family, 3 adult children and 7 grandchildren, gathered in Los Angeles for the reading of the will. None of them expected what came next. The estate was divided. Stocks, homes, art. Some went to foundations, some to longtime staff. But the Whitmore estate, the private foundation, the cliffside house in Carmel, and her remaining liquid assets, the heart of her legacy, were not given to any of them. They were left to a young man most of the family had never met. A 28-year-old hotel waiter. One of the grandsons laughed out loud. A daughter-in-law dropped her glass. Her eldest son stood and left the room without saying a word. Only her lawyer remained calm. She was of sound mind, he said gently, almost with reverence, and very clear in her intent. They contested it within a week, filed motions, hired PR firms, whispered about manipulation and fraud. Gold digger, they called him in headlines, servant turned schemer. They combed through surveillance footage, receipts, staff logs, anything to prove he had planned it. But there were no texts, no secret meetings, no paper trail, only a few notes, a few sketches, a folded letter that smelled of lavender, and a memory shared between 2 people that couldn't be subpoenaed. The young man never moved into the Carmel estate, not because he wasn't allowed, the court hadn't blocked it, but because something about the house felt too still, too full of someone else's breath. Instead, he stayed in a modest apartment 2 towns away, quiet and tucked behind a laundromat, where no one asked questions and the lights hummed late into the night. He visited the estate only once after the will was read. It was raining that morning. Not the sharp, angry kind of rain, but a soft drizzle that misted the glass and made everything feel like it was underwater. He walked the hallways slowly, as if afraid to touch anything. The Whitmore house wasn't gaudy, no gold finishes or fountains, just old wood, art without plaques, and a faint scent of books and chamomile. In the main study, above the fireplace, hung a portrait of Hannah Cooper. It was painted before she turned 60. Sharp eyes, silver streaks already showing, her lips caught between a smile and a challenge. She wore no jewelry, no brooch, just a blazer the color of charcoal and her wedding ring. He stood in front of the painting for a long time, and then, with a whisper barely above breath, he said, "You were the first person who ever made me feel like I wasn't just passing through." He didn't stay long, just enough to light one of her candles and leave a small note on the desk, a line from the same Rilke book they'd once traded quotes from. "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart." By the time the lawsuit reached its 3rd hearing, Media coverage had softened. The family's attorneys pressed harder, demanding proof of undue influence. They pointed to the age gap, to the summer visits, to the unusual bond, as one of them phrased it. But no scandal surfaced, no secret romance, no transactions, no promises, just stillness. And that, more than anything, unnerved the courtroom. He never defended himself in the papers, never granted an interview. When pressed, his only public statement was quiet and firm. "She gave me nothing I asked for, only what she chose." The judge delayed the ruling. Weeks, then months, while public opinion shifted like weather. Some saw him as a grifter, others a mystery. But those who had served with Hannah Cooper, women who sat beside her on nonprofit boards, secretaries who had stayed with her for decades, they began to speak up. Not loudly, just letters. To the court, to the press, to her family. Letters that spoke of a woman who had grown weary of polished dinners and hollow legacies, who once said in passing, "I'd rather be remembered for one honest connection than 100 hollow ones." And slowly, what began as outrage softened into confusion, and confusion into silence. The final court date came quietly. No press conference, no TV cameras, just a clerk with a soft voice reading out the ruling in a room that smelled faintly of old paper and floor wax. The will would stand. There was no evidence of coercion, no legal basis to override her decision. The estate would remain in the hands of the man she had chosen, the young waiter who had never once asked for it. Her children didn't speak to him. They exited the courtroom stiff and expressionless, like people leaving a play they hadn't enjoyed. One daughter clutched her purse too tightly. Another murmured something about appeals, but her voice lacked conviction. He didn't celebrate. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging the weight of what had just been affirmed. Not just her wealth, but her faith in him. And then he left, unnoticed, through a side door into a gray afternoon where rain clouds hung low over the courthouse steps. What followed wasn't a lavish life. There were no sports cars, no mansions purchased, no magazine profiles. He used part of the inheritance to open a small community bookstore in her name, Whitmore and Quiet, nestled between a florist and a bakery in a quiet part of town where people still waved from their porches. The shelves were lined with the kinds of books they once traded: Hemingway, Rilke, Baldwin, Dickinson. A soft bell jingled above the door. Coffee was always brewing. No one ever mentioned the lawsuit inside. No one needed to. He kept her picture behind the counter. Not the portrait, but a small candid photo. She was seated on the garden bench, a paperback open on her lap, looking not at the camera but just beyond it, as if listening to the sea. Sometimes customers asked who she was. He'd pause, offer a soft smile, and say someone who saw things clearly. The store never made much money, but every month, donations quietly went out to literacy programs, domestic violence shelters, and local food banks, all in her name. When a young girl once asked why he didn't just spend the money on himself, he simply replied, "I already received the most valuable thing." She wrinkled her nose. "What's that?" He smiled. "A chance to matter." That fall, a new bench was installed behind the bookstore, tucked beneath an old maple tree that dropped golden leaves like confetti come October. No plaque, just space, for sitting, for thinking, for letting the world slow down. And once in a while someone would find a folded note left there. Just a quote, handwritten, no name. But the handwriting was unmistakable. As the seasons turned, the lawsuit became a footnote, a curiosity whispered among those who still followed the names of old money. But for him, it was never about the headline. He spent his mornings unlocking the bookstore just before sunrise, letting in the smell of old paper and the sound of the kettle boiling in the back. He dusted shelves, straightened bookmarks, and placed a single chair by the front window, where the light poured in slow and golden. The town grew used to his presence. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't mysterious, just kind. And steady. Hannah Cooper's children, for all their lawyers and press agents, quietly retreated from public view. One daughter moved to the East Coast. Her son sold off 2 properties. A grandson, once eager to take over the family foundation, started a podcast no one listened to. None of them ever visited the bookstore. But one afternoon, nearly 2 years after the court ruling, a woman in her late 50s stepped into the shop. She looked around with caution, not fear, but something more fragile. Recognition, perhaps. She approached the counter slowly. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said softly. "I just wanted to see." He didn't ask her name. He knew. She lingered near the shelf labeled her favorites, running her fingers along spines she must have once seen in her mother's study. Her eyes paused on a copy of The Old Man and the Sea, its edges worn from handling. "She never gave things easily," the woman said. "No," he replied, "but when she did, she meant it." They stood in silence a while longer. Then she took a folded $20 bill from her coat and bought the book without another word. When she reached the door, she turned back. "She must have seen something in you." He didn't respond, because to explain it would have made it smaller. She left quietly, and he returned to his chair by the window, where the sunlight was now falling gently across the hardwood floor in long, familiar lines. That evening, as the street lamps blinked on and the smell of early fall drifted in through the open windows, he reread her letter one last time. The same 4 lines she'd left for him. He still kept it folded between the pages of Rilke. And in that quiet, with the shop closed and the world turned low, he whispered the last line to himself, like a vow. "This world will not always reward that, but I will." Some legacies are loud. Others live in silence, in soft pages and small kindnesses. And some, like Hannah Cooper's, endure not because of wealth, but because of what can't be taken. Years passed, not loudly, but like the turning of soft pages. The town came to know the bookstore as something more than a place to buy books. It was where people came to sit, to remember, or to be remembered. Local teachers brought students in for reading hours. Retired couples stopped in on Sunday afternoons. Young writers left folded poems in the free book bin, hopeful and anonymous. And quietly, Hannah's name lived on, not carved in marble, not etched on billboards, but scribbled into the margins of borrowed paperbacks, whispered in conversations that began with, "Did you know she once?" The young man, no longer quite so young, never gave interviews, never sought attention, but he kept her stories alive. Every November he hosted a small gathering on the bench behind the shop. No flyers, no press, just candles, warm cider, and readings from the books she loved. Some guests never knew the full story. They just came because it felt like the right place to be. One evening, a teenager asked him if he was her grandson. He smiled and shook his head. "No, just someone she once noticed." And that somehow was enough. Because in a world that moved too quickly and rewarded too loudly, her legacy had found its resting place, not in fortune, but in the simple act of being seen and choosing to see back. He grew older, slowly, the way people do when they live gently. His hair thinned, his hands grew more careful with age, and his gait carried the quiet patience of someone who had made peace with not rushing. One winter, he fell ill. Nothing dramatic, just a season that lingered longer than his body could hold. Neighbors checked in. Letters arrived. A nurse visited each morning. He moved a small cot into the back of the bookstore and slept surrounded by the rustle of paper and the warmth of lamp-lit shelves. And in the final days, he wrote something of his own. Not a memoir, not an explanation, just a single letter sealed in the same cream envelope she had once used, tucked into the same copy of Rilke he always kept nearby. The letter read, "You saw me when I was invisible. You spoke gently when the world shouted. You left behind more than wealth. You left me the courage to live without apology. This store is not a tribute, it is a continuation. M.W." He passed away in the quiet of an early spring morning, as birds stirred and the sky turned soft with light. They found the letter a week later. No family came forward, no estate battles, no scandals, just a town that mourned in its own way, by showing up, by lighting candles, by reading aloud. And behind the store, the bench beneath the maple tree, gathered new notes, new names, new people who had also felt invisible once, until someone made them feel seen. Some people leave behind trust funds, properties, and stock portfolios, but the rarest leave behind something deeper, a quiet kind of legacy. One that can't be sold, stolen, or rewritten in court. Hannah Cooper didn't choose wealth when she wrote her will. She chose meaning. And in doing so, she reminded all of us that sometimes the person who changes your life is the one no one else ever saw coming. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments. What moment in Hannah Cooper's journey moved you the most? And if you were listening closely, you might notice how often Hannah Cooper's name came up. Just for fun, how many times did you hear Hannah Cooper in the story? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you're right within 7 days, we may feature your name in a shout-out as a thank you for being part of our Fiction Echoes family. Watching this later? Don't worry, we still read every comment, and surprises may still come your way. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this one, the next chapter is already waiting. Just click the video that's about to appear, and we'll see you there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a moment of what happens next.